You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we review the third ODI between Australia and New Zealand from Cazaly Stadium. It's the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the match summary from the third ODI between Australia and New Zealand from Cazaly Stadium in Cairns. Australia batted first and made 5 for 267 from their 50 overs. Smith top scored with 105 and Bolt took 2 wickets for New Zealand. New Zealand needed 268 runs to win. They finished on 242 all out from 49.5 overs. Phillips top scored with 47. Stark took 3 wickets for Australia. Australia won by 25 runs, and the player of the match was Steve Smith. What were the key moments and key factors from this third ODI between Australia and New Zealand? New Zealand's bowling, having Australia 2 for 16 inside 5.4 overs to apply early pressure to Australia's fragile top order. The partnership between Smith and Labuschagne of 118 for the third wicket set the platform for Australia and prevented another top order collapse. The partnerships of 69 for the 4th wicket between Smith and Carey and 40 unbeaten for the 6th wicket between Carey and Green guided Australia to 5 for 267 from their 50 overs. Australia's bowling to dismiss New Zealand for 242 to see Australia to victory by 25 runs and winning the series 3-0. Those were the key moments and key factors from this third ODI at Cazaly Stadium. Let's have a look at both teams' performances in this third ODI at Cazaly Stadium with both bat and ball. We'll start with Australia and their batters. Inglis, 10, Finch, 5, Smith, 105, Labuschagne, 52, Carey, 42 not out, Maxwell, 14, and Green, 25 not out. That's how the Australian batters went about things in this third ODI against New Zealand in Cairns. Now, Australia's batting in this third ODI against New Zealand was much better compared to games 1 and 2. Now, Australia were in early trouble again. No surprises there. There were 2 for 16 inside 5.4 overs as Josh Inglis, who came in for David Warner in this match to open the batting, was given his opportunity to open the batting with Aaron Finch. He was playing in his final ODI because he announced his retirement. Both of them got out early. Once again, New Zealand got early wickets with Bolt getting Inglis and Southey getting Finch out-bowled in his final ODI for Australia for 5. Australia's top order was in danger of collapsing again, which we've seen throughout the series thus far, but Smith and Labuschagne came together and rebuilt the innings for Australia. They added 118 for the third wicket and helped set the foundation for Australia to build on. Then, once Labuschagne got out, Smith was joined by Alex Carey out in the middle, and Smith and Carey added 69 for the 4th wicket. And as soon as Smith departed, after making a well-earned century of 105, Carey and Green came together, just like in Game 1, and they got Australia to that score of 267. They added 40 unbeaten for the 6th wicket, which guided Australia to that very good score of 267, which was enough in the end to win this match. So the batting for Australia was pretty good, as I said in this match. They stopped the batting collapses, which was very important. And it was important for them to learn from their past experiences, the top order, and to prevent these collapses from happening. They certainly did that. Obviously, let's have a look at Australia's top order collapses against Zimbabwe and New Zealand. Now, in the last game against Zimbabwe, they lost 5 for 72. And they got bowled out for 141 and they lost that game, as we all know. Game number 1 of this series against New Zealand, 5 for 44 inside 12 overs. Game 2 of the series against New Zealand, 5 for 54 inside 18.3 overs. And in the last game against New Zealand, 2 for 16 inside 5.4 overs. So Australia have improved in terms of their top order batting, in terms of stopping the batting collapses. But definitely the third game and the first and second game of the series against New Zealand, the last game against Zimbabwe, that was pretty poor in terms of the top order collapsing, not doing their job. But in this game, there were 2 down for 16. They lost Inglis and Finch early. But Steve Smith, Marnus Labuschagne were able to build that partnership of 118 and get Australia back on track. So that was good to see that Smith and Labuschagne, they can work together in the same team. There's been some talk about Smith and Labuschagne being in the same team. Both of them are very similar players in terms of the way they bat, but I thought they did a very good job, and they were able to rebuild and really absorb the pressure by the New Zealand bowlers in this third game. So it was very important for them just to build a partnership, get the team back on track and set the platform. As we know, this pitch in Cairns is pretty slow. It was difficult to bat on. So if Australia got a partnership, a few good partnerships, which they did in this match, as we mentioned earlier, they were able to get to a score of 267, which was plenty on this pitch, as New Zealand were bowled out for 242. So it was good to see that improvement from Australia's top order. But in saying that, they've got to do it on a consistent basis. And Australia will have a lot of questions to ask themselves heading into the future for this one-day team. As I mentioned, Aaron Finch is now retired. He announced his retirement heading into this last game of the series. So Australia would need to think about a new opener and also a new captain. We saw Josh Inglis get a go today in this third ODI. He got out for 10. You've also got him as an option to open the batting with David Warner now because of Finch's retirement. You've also got Josh Philippe. You've got Travis Head and Ben McDermott, who are possible candidates for that opening position. So for Australia, it'll be interesting to see who they go with to open the batting with David Warner now Finch is retired. And that will certainly probably strengthen the opening partnership and also the top order. But it was good to see Australia bat properly for once and stop these batting collapses, which has been a bit of a problem for Australia over the years in terms of the batting collapses. So it was good to see the top order doing its job. Let's talk about Steve Smith. I thought he played a very good innings, 105, typical Steve Smith innings. He was fidgeting, he was moving around the crease, he was playing some good shots. Did his role for the team, very important century, and it was good to see a batter in the top order, I should say, get a good score, get a big score, convert their start into a big score, into a century. That's what you want to see from your top order batters, and Steve Smith did that. And he was able to get a century. The partnership he had with Marnus, who also batted well, good half century from him, was able to get Australia to that 267 score. I thought Alex Carey and Cameron Green batted well again. Obviously, they came together at the end of the innings for Australia. They added 40 unbeaten for the 6th wicket. Obviously, Alex Carey, Cameron Green like batting with each other. Good to see Alex Carey really scoring some runs and taking his opportunities. He got 42 not out in game number 3. Cameron Green picked up where he left off from game 1 against New Zealand. He got 25 not out. It was a very handy partnership. It was able to accelerate the innings for Australia and get to that score of 267. So I thought Carey and Green batted well again. Labuschagne, as I mentioned, did his role. So there was much to like about Australia's batting in this match. Good to see the improvements being made, but the key for Australia is they've got to do it on a consistent basis. And they've got some tough questions to ask themselves now, Australia. Who's going to be that potential opener now because of Aaron Finch's retirement? Is it going to be Josh Inglis? He was already tried in this match, in this third game of the series, replacing Warner, who was being managed. You've got Josh Philippe, you've got Travis Head, you've got Ben McDermott. So there's plenty of options there for Australia. But overall, it was a good batting performance from Australia in Game 3 of this ODI series against New Zealand. Let's have a look at the Australian bowlers and their performance in this third ODI against New Zealand in Cairns. No wickets for Maxwell, 2 wickets for Green and Abbott, 3 wickets for Stark, and a wicket each for Zampa and Hazelwood. That's how the Australian bowlers went about things against New Zealand. Once again, Australia's bowlers got the job done. They bowled New Zealand out for 242. They've been bowling well throughout this whole series, the Australian bowlers. The bowling performance wasn't as good in Game 3 compared to Game 2 for Australia. Obviously, the New Zealand batters were able to put the Australian bowlers under pressure in Game 3, and you could see Mitchell Stark, Zampa, and Hazelwood leaking runs. Even Sean Abbott. Sean Abbott bowled well in the last game, but he was leaking runs as well. Whereas in the last game, he bowled 4 maidens in a row and had 2 for none. So how quickly the game of cricket can change from one game to the other. So this bowling performance from Australia was still good. They were able to bowl New Zealand out for 242. In the end, they won the game, which is the main thing. But their bowling performance in this game wasn't as polished as it was in game number 2. Now, that's a number of factors. Number one, as I mentioned, the New Zealand batters were able to put pressure back on the Australian bowlers for once in the series. Also, they were playing on a different surface. It was a different pitch on the square for game 3. And also, Australia defending a big total of 267. The pressure and the willingness to really tighten the screws weren't there. So it wasn't as polished as it was in game 2 compared to this game, but it was still good bowling performance from Australia. They did the basics well with the ball. They were bowling dot balls. They were executing their skills and plans with the ball, putting pressure on the New Zealand batters, and they were able to pick up wickets at regular intervals. So Australia, in the end, it wasn't as polished in game 2 in this game for them in terms of how they bowled, but in the end, they bowled them out for 242 and they were able to get the job done. And I think for the Australian bowlers, that's one positive for Australia in this whole series, is that the bowling attack has been firing. Despite Australia being behind in the first 2 games, the bowling attack has been able to get them back into the match, especially in game 2, where they bowled New Zealand out for 82 after Australia made 195. The bowling attack bowled New Zealand out for 82 and won the game for Australia. So that's good signs heading into the World Cup, that the likes of Stark, Samper and Hazlewood are taking wickets and in good touch. It's good to see Sean Abbott get his opportunity. He's bowled well in the last 2 games of this series. Cameron Green coming back into the 3rd game. Obviously, he missed out game 2. He bowled well. Glenn Maxwell didn't take any wickets, but it's good to have him as an option in terms of the spin department, and you definitely need that going into India. So a very good bowling performance again from Australia. As I mentioned, wasn't as polished as it was in game 2, but doesn't matter. They got the job done. They bowled New Zealand out for 242. So you would take that as a bowling side. But they did the basics well. They're on song. Even though they didn't have Pat Cummins in this series, Australia, but when Pat Cummins does come back to this bowling attack, it's going to be even stronger. So it's good to see the depth in terms of Abbott coming in, Cameron Green taking wickets. So it's good to see the depth coming through Australian cricket in terms of the bowling ranks are doing the job and taking wickets when the main bowlers like Cummins or Stark or Samper or Hazlewood are not playing. It's good to see the others doing their job. So overall, it was a good bowling performance from Australia. Overall, it was a good performance from Australia in game 3 of this ODI series against New Zealand. Let's have a look at New Zealand's team performance with both bat and ball in this 3rd ODI at Cazaly Stadium. We'll start with their batters. Allen, 35, Conway, 21, Williamson, 27, Latham, 10, Mitchell, 16, Phillips, 47, and Neesham, 36. That's how the New Zealand batters went about things against Australia in this 3rd ODI of the series. New Zealand's batting in game 3 of this series was poor again. Didn't get going at all in the run chase. Chasing 268 was always going to be tough, but New Zealand fought hard to try and chase down the runs. In the end, it wasn't to be. The main factor for New Zealand in this innings, the 2 main factors, I should say, that really let them down in the batting performance in game 3, losing wickets at regular intervals, 1 for 49, 2 for 57, 3 for 77, 4 for 106, 5 for 112, 6 for 173, 7 for 224, 8 for 230, 9 for 242, and all out for 242. The other factor, not building partnerships or backing up partnerships at all. The partnerships they had in this 3rd game were 49, 8, 20, 29, 6, 61, 51, 6, 12, and 0. So that's not good. You've got to have big partnerships than that. They only had 2 50-run partnerships for the innings, and that was 61 for the 6th wicket between Neesham and Phillips, 51 for the 7th wicket between Sattler and Phillips. In the end, those 2 partnerships weren't enough to get New Zealand over the line. Now, we saw in this New Zealand batting innings the batters for New Zealand getting starts, but not converting them into big scores like Steve Smith did when he scored his century in Australia's innings. There was some poor decision-making from the New Zealand batters. There was some poor shot selection as well. So those are the little things that let New Zealand down in this match. Losing wickets, not building partnerships, batters getting in, getting out, not converting starts, poor decision-making and poor shot selection. But the one thing that we saw from New Zealand in this game, which was much better compared to game 1 and 2, was their intent with the bat. And that's been the big talking point from New Zealand, is their intent with the bat. There weren't too many dot balls in this game in terms of the batting for New Zealand. They were looking to put pressure back onto the Australian bowlers, which showed the Australian bowlers were conceding runs, unlike in game 2, for example. Finn Allen and Glenn Phillips, who came into the side, are two aggressive players, and New Zealand wanted that in their batting in this game, and they got that. Finn Allen and Glenn Phillips were being attacking, they were being aggressive, they were hitting boundaries, they weren't leaving too many balls, and that's what was lacking for the New Zealand batters in games 1 and 2, that intent, positive intent, looking to put pressure back onto the Australian bowlers. Now, despite all that, New Zealand struggled again with the bat, and for New Zealand, we come back to that question of the mental battle. When playing Australia in Australia, they can't seem to shift that barrier mentally of beating this Australian team in Australia. And this series, losing 3-0, has reflected the way they've played. They've played poorly. Their batting has been poor. We know New Zealand can bat better than this. But it's just when they come to Australia, they always struggle for some reason. And it's something that they need to work out. Otherwise, they're not going to win too many games in Australia if they keep batting the way they've been batting, especially in this ODI series, not putting pressure back on the Australian bowlers. That's what cost them in game 2 when they got bowled out for 82, because they got bogged down. Scoreboard wasn't going anywhere. But in this game, they showed much better intent, but it was a bit too late. And as I mentioned, they lost wickets, they weren't backing up partnerships. Kane Williamson got run out with Glenn Phillips, sums up New Zealand's mindset and their batting. They're just all over the place. They're not with it. So, yeah, very poor again from New Zealand. They'll be very disappointed. Their bowling's been the only positive in this series, but not their batting. And for them, they've got a lot of questions to answer, especially going into a World Cup next year in India. They've got to really assess where their batting is as a group at the moment in this one-day side, because against Australia, they can't seem to get the job done. And you want the batting to be firing, especially going into a World Cup next year in India. So a lot of questions for New Zealand to answer them, to ask themselves, and for the players themselves in terms of the batting group, how to change our mindset and looking to be a bit more aggressive when it comes to the batting side of things. But as I said, poor performance again from New Zealand with the bat. Overall, it was a poor batting performance from New Zealand in Game 3 of this ODI series against Australia. Let's have a look at the New Zealand bowlers and their performance in this third ODI against Australia in Cairns. No wickets for Mitchell and Neesham, a wicket each for Satner, Southey and Ferguson, and 2 wickets for Bolt. That's how the New Zealand bowlers went about things in this third ODI against Australia. Now, New Zealand's bowling in Game 3 was poor. Unlike Game 1 and Game 2 where they bowled really well, Game 3 is where things started to go wrong for the bowling group. They took 2 early wickets early on. They had Australia 2 for 16 inside 5.4 overs. Tim Southey and Trent Boult taking those 2 wickets of Inglis and Finch. But unlike in Games 1 and 2, Australia's top order in Game 3 didn't crumble or collapse. Steve Smith, Marnus Labuschagne got Australia back on track with that partnership of 118 for the 3rd wicket, and New Zealand didn't quite get it right with the ball during and after that partnership. The other partnerships that Australia had, New Zealand did not bowl to them either. Smith and Carey, when they combined for the 4th wicket, they added 69 runs, and Carey and Green, just like in Game 1, did the same thing in Game 2. For the 6th wicket, they added 40 unbeaten for the 6th wicket, and those partnerships, along with the Smith and Labuschagne partnership of 118, got Australia to that 267 score, and New Zealand did not quite bowl well to all of those batters. New Zealand just leaked runs. They couldn't contain the pressure with the ball, didn't bowl too many dot balls. Australia were able to find the gaps and score runs. And that's what Smith and Labuschagne did in their partnership so well. They couldn't build the pressure on the Australian batters. They couldn't bowl 6 balls at them. Australia were always looking for singles and rotating the strike. New Zealand, they didn't take wickets at regular intervals. Didn't quite execute their skills and plans for the ball. Once again, Trent Boult was the standout bowler for New Zealand. He's been the #1 bowler for New Zealand in this whole series. The rest of the bowlers struggled. And this is the thing with New Zealand. The middle overs, from overs 11 to 40, they struggled in this game 3. The other bowlers like Neesham, Satner, Southey, Ferguson, all conceding runs. All over 50 runs, plus, up towards 60. So that's an indication, whereas Trent Boult conceded only 25 runs. So that's an indication that the other bowlers that New Zealand have are just leaking runs and not quite executing their skills. As we saw in this 3rd game of the series, that's what happened, and Australia were able to take advantage of that. So New Zealand's bowling compared to Game 1 and Game 2, Game 3 was probably their worst performance. Game 1 and 2, they bowled well, but weren't able to win those games and weren't able to put Australia under pressure after they had Australia on the ropes. But in game number 3, I thought this was their worst bowling performance of the series. And Australia were able to take advantage of that and get a score that was enough on this pitch. 267 was enough. So for New Zealand, not their finest bowling performance, but the #1 positive throughout this whole series for New Zealand hasn't been their batting, but it's been their bowling. Unfortunately, their bowling let them down in game number 3 of this series. So overall, it was a poor bowling performance from New Zealand in game 3. Overall, it was a mixed performance from New Zealand with both bat and ball in game 3 of this ODI series against Australia. A good win by Australia, winning by 25 runs in this final ODI to claim the series 3-0 and the Chappell Hadley Trophy. A good way to send off Aaron Finch in style after he announced his retirement from one-day cricket. After being 2 for 16 inside 5.4 overs, Australia were able to stop another batting collapse to post a total of 5 for 267, all thanks to a wonderful century from Steve Smith of 105 and key partnerships of 118 for the 3rd wicket between Smith and Labuschagne, 69 for the 4th wicket between Smith and Carey, and 40 unbeaten for the 6th wicket between Carey and Green. New Zealand would be disappointed to lose this final game of the series. They haven't played well at all in this series, and the 3-0 result reflects that. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.